Maritza Wong leads the Texas chapter of Moms Demand Action, the country's 10 million member organization dedicated to gun reform. Her role is coordinating Texas's efforts and messaging with national objectives, and she focuses on leveraging the organization's common sense approach to achieve inspiring results in a deep red state. Welcome to the Science of Good, where we sit down with cause leaders who are disrupting the status quo, tackling our toughest societal problems, and seeking better ways to spark change. Welcome, Maritza, and thank you so much for joining us for another conversation here on the Science of Good. As a mom of three, I know how busy motherhood can be. So tell me a little bit about how you got involved with Moms Demand Action.
Sure. So I have two children of my own. And when they were young, my youngest started kindergarten in 2012. And when they were young, I just dove all the way into PTA. And I did that for 10 years. I was heavily involved in that. And so learned a lot about their schools, the school systems in Texas. And after those 10 years in 2022, I had decided, well, there's probably maybe some other interests I want to explore. You know, I'll still be involved, but not to the extent that I had been. And so I had kind of decided in 2022 to take a step back, a break from that. And unfortunately, that May is when the shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas happened. I was born and raised in San Antonio, so not far from Uvalde. My family is Mexican American, so I definitely identified with the community down there. You know, just knowing how tight-knit Hispanic families are. And seeing just the horror that they had to live through in that community, which is still ongoing, the trauma. So I knew at that point that my break really wasn't going to be a break, that I was going to dive into this work now. And so I started out as just a volunteer going to monthly meetings, learning about the movement. It was an election year. And so I participated in some of our activities to help get gun sense candidates elected, which is a program that we have. It's a distinction that candidates can earn if they commit to governing with gun safety in mind. And so I spent my first summer doing some of that work. Later that fall, I actually took on the role of state school safety lead. And I think my experience with PTA and in schools, it was just a perfect match, that we had that need, that parents in Texas really wanted to know about school safety and know how they could be involved. So bringing my past experience into what I was learning with Moms Demand Action, it was a role that I really loved. And I did it for about 18 months. And I'm still passionate about it. My kids are still in school. They're both in high school. But about a month ago, I took on the role of Texas chapter lead. Our prior lead had been in that role for a little over 2 years. And, you know, we all get tired and it's time to pass the baton. And I was lucky enough that I was asked to take on this role. And so 1 month in, I'm still learning, but it's been a great experience.
Rashonda and I are talking with nonprofit leaders every day, and one of the common struggles is coordinating volunteers. Particularly, I think about on Moms Demand Action is a national organization and a statewide group of volunteers. How does communication work? How does the organization marshal all of the energy of these passionate moms who care about gun safety?
Right. And that's a really good point, that we are all very passionate. But it's important that we also stay focused on things that we can make progress, areas that we can make progress in. And so Moms Demand Action, we are all volunteers, all grassroots throughout the country in all 50 states. But our parent organization is Everytown for Gun Safety, and they have staff to help with that sort of thing. They have a communication staff, legal staff, administrative, lots of different departments that are there to support us and help us. So when we have an issue that comes up, whether it's in a state or nationwide, we do get talking points to help guide us that are backed up by data. so that we feel confident speaking about the issues, and also that we all stay on the same page, that someone in Hawaii is focused on the same issues and priorities as someone in South Carolina or anywhere else in the country. So that's extremely helpful for us because, again, we're all volunteers. A lot of us have full-time jobs. Most of us have very busy family lives. And so that support is really helpful.
Is there a monthly call, a quarterly meeting, a national gathering of leaders?
I think probably all of the above. So in all 50 states, we have, a chapter, but we also have local groups usually in the big cities or in areas, where there are just a lot of volunteers that can get together in person. And so our local groups will meet in person monthly, or sometimes they do it virtual, a hybrid, whatever works for that group. And that's where we talk about what's happening in our own community, state priorities, and then sometimes we talk about the federal, the national issues as well. Our national group also will sometimes plan calls. We've had a couple this summer about, the election season. We have different trainings that are at the national level sometimes that is really helpful for our volunteers to attend, like how to engage on social media. Or maybe just something that is educational for us. One year we had one about the intersection of gun violence with the LGBTQ community. And so there are virtual trainings available, in person, just so many opportunities to whatever level, to whatever depth you want to get involved with. They're all there.
Kevin, what I love about this is talk about mom power, as I like to call it, because Moms Demand Action, you all have 10 million members, twice the amount as the NRA. So how do you rally and build that kind of base?
Right. I mean, it's amazing when you look at that number. I do want to make sure that people aren't intimidated. We actually consider ourselves supporters rather than members, simply because no one has to come and pay dues or anything like that.
Love that.
If you are supportive of this movement, whether it's signing a petition that we have online or joining your in-person local actions, maybe you can't do any of that, but you want to make a small donation. So we are all almost nearly 10 million supporters that show up in some way for this movement. And this movement started really small. Shannon Watts, our founder, started it online in a social media group in 2012, immediately after the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And it was her and a few moms from throughout the country that were equally horrified with what had happened. The situation in our country that allowed a shooting like that to happen in a school. And so that's how it started. Those moms putting their heads together and coming up with actions, things that they could do. In 2013, so about a year later, Moms Demand Action joined with Mayors Against Illegal Guns. And that's how Everytown was formed. And again, Everytown provides that support system for us, the tools that we need to grow as volunteers, to grow as a movement. But also just this issue is one that all Americans care about. Last year in 2023, before we went to our legislative session in Texas, some polling was done around gun laws and, background checks. 86% of voting Texans supported that. Raising the age to purchase certain semi-automatic weapons from 18 to 21, 80% of Texans supported that. So these common sense measures, we use that term a lot, common sense, because most people see how valuable these rules can be to keeping our communities safer.
I'm struck by the uphill climb. That this just seems like an issue with every tragedy. There's an insistence that change come, and I so respect and appreciate the progress that you're making on a state-by-state basis. But at the same time, I imagine it can be hard to maintain the momentum, maintain the energy, maintain the resistance when we're in a situation where the minority is the minority opinion is leading most legislation. How do you maintain your fight?
It's really important to always look for hope, right? And every town, they spend a lot of time looking at data, evidence, research, things that show us that we can prevent gun violence, that it's not inevitable. Um, Although it may feel that way, it may feel hopeless sometimes. We can make a difference. One report analysis that they put out was an analysis of the strength of gun laws in all of our 50 states, and they compared that to the rate of gun violence in those states. And you can see when they display it as a graphic, and you can see when you look at that graphic, there's a correlation that states with stronger gun laws have lower rates of gun violence. So I think it's important to remind our volunteers. I mean, we're all in this because we have hope, and what other choice do we have? We want to protect our families, right? But to look to those things that show us that progress is possible. It might not feel like it in whatever moment you're in, that you're living in or going through, but progress is possible, and we can look to examples of that.
It takes an amazing amount of steadiness and persistence to make change happen. So just hats off to that persistence. I know how necessary it is.
So kudos to you. So what's next on the agenda?
Yes, so that is going to look very different by state, right? What California is working towards is very different than what Mississippi or Tennessee is working towards. I would say here in Texas, we're going to have another legislative session in 2025, and I'm fairly certain we will continue to fight to raise the age to purchase certain semi-automatic weapons from 18 to 21. That is something that families from Uvalde fought for and showed up at the Capitol for just continuously last session in 2023, and we supported them in that. And that is an extremely reasonable measure. Like I mentioned, here in Texas, 80% of voters polling showed supported that. So the support is there. It's just showing up to make it happen. I would say nationally, a focus for our organization is also gun industry accountability. There's a law, it's referred to as PLCA, the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. It was passed in 2005, and it grants the gun industry immunity. An immunity unlike any other consumer industry. They are protected from lawsuits when their products or their practices harm people. And so they've been able to operate without any kind of accountability. And that's something that, again, research is spending a lot of time on to see what the consequences of, that dangerous law have been. And so repealing that, rolling that back is something that would make our community safer by holding the industry accountable. So, that's an example of something at the national level that that we're going to continue to work on.
Moms Demand Action has done such a good job reframing or framing the narrative around gun violence and and gun safety. I know that every town does a lot of research to inform that positioning and that narrative. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So all of the campaigns that we ask our volunteers to engage in, whether it's a petition or contacting a lawmaker or sharing something on social media, there's always data and evidence behind that every town has done the homework for us. So we can go out and tell our supporters, hey, look, these are the facts. And so this is why we're advocating for this policy or this position. One thing that we really go out into the community with, our local volunteers that we show up in person for a lot, is our Be Smart program. And that is a secure gun storage education program that we share with adults. We talk about the importance of secure gun storage to protect our children from the dangers of unsecured guns. And so SMART is an acronym. S is for securing guns in homes and vehicles. M is for modeling responsible behavior around guns. A is for asking about unsecured guns in other homes before your child goes to visit. R is recognizing the role of guns in suicide. And T is telling others to be smart. And so we go out and share that message, but we don't just say it because, hey, this is a good idea. There's data behind that. Unfortunately, firearms are the leading cause of death for children and teens in America right now. It surpassed automobiles, and I believe 2021 was the year. And a lot of people don't know that. Some of our volunteers, when they share that information, when they're tabling for Be Smart, sometimes people don't believe them. And they say, no, where did you get that data? Well, it came from the CDC. And so that can be really powerful to share with people something maybe they didn't know before as to why we are here sharing this message, why it's so important. Another thing that I like to cite a lot when we're out doing the Be Smart tabling is a recent report that Everytown did. They analyzed gun thefts and gun thefts from cars in particular. And there were lots of findings from that report. One of them was that over half of stolen guns actually come from cars. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people also don't know that. They don't think about that. Maybe they think about secure storage in their home, but not in the car. Maybe they are carrying their gun somewhere, they need to run in and they don't want to take their gun and it's left out in the parking lot. And so that's a really important conversation that we can have, that now we can say, this is what the facts are, what the data shows us. And again, just to awaken people to maybe something they didn't know before and why it's important that we all have these conversations.
One of the things I definitely want to touch on is responsible gun ownership. The counter narrative is you're going to take my gun away. And I know that that's a false narrative, that many gun owners, hunters, law enforcement, and want this legislation and want this control over who gets firearms. Can you speak a little bit about that? I mean, that has to be and pardon me for bringing it up, it has to be a frustrating refrain for you to hear. You're going to take my guns away.
Right. It can be frustrating at times because I think that's just an assumption that a lot of people make. But there are gun owners within our movement. There are veterans within our movement who are knowledgeable and trained about gun safety. And so, taking responsible actions around gun ownership does not infringe upon someone's right to own a gun, a law-abiding citizen. Both of those things can exist. Common sense gun laws that exist for safety, along with someone's right to own a firearm. Those things can and do exist side by side. I mean, many of us, I'm sure we all know responsible gun owners who want to stop seeing mass shootings, who want to stop seeing, interpersonal fight that escalates into someone being shot because a gun is just so readily accessible. So it's just a matter of having those one-on-one conversations with people to get past that initial assumption they may have about this movement.
The refreshing, reasonable, and one-on-one conversations. That's why that 10 million strong number is so important. So, Rashonda, do you want to get into our last guest question for Maritza?
Sure. One of the things that we always do, we ask the previous guest to put you in the hot seat and ask you a question. And in turn, you will then pose a question for our next guest. So our previous guest, Akira, who is with Project Heal, asked, if your organization didn't exist, where would folks turn to fill in the gap?
Wow. I mean, gosh, with 10 million supporters, this is all I know, right? But there are other gun violence prevention organizations. that are doing the work, the advocacy, also, analyzing, digging deep into those laws. So there are, other ways to engage, whether it's if it's a large organization or a small one. But, I really think what Moms Demand Action offers is a structure for that busy person who doesn't have time to devote to this movement in the way of someone that a full-time job has, right? Like it's very easy for this to become like a second job for a volunteer, but most of us don't have that kind of time. We need some sort of structure that's going to direct us and say, what is an action I can do this week? And then next week, here's something else, or maybe just once a month or every 2 months, and so I think that's something really important that, Moms Demand Action, we understand where our volunteers are coming from, and just, again, all the things that we have up in the air that we're juggling. And so hopefully we're a place where people can come in and find where they belong in, the time commitment that they have, whatever it is, in whatever way they can show up.
Awesome. What would be your question for our next guest?
I think that would be, what does self-care look like for you?
Oh, that's really good. I'm gonna put you in the hot seat. What does that look like for you, tackling a topic like this as a mom?
Gosh. Honestly, I think it's those mindless tasks where I can be in my own space, my own world. And for me, a lot of times that's gardening. When I'm out there pulling weeds, trimming plants, and it's 100 degrees outside in Texas, that's all I can think about is what's right in front of me, and just making progress on a plant or whatever. So for me, that it's a little bit of escape for me that I really enjoy.
Gardening definitely is therapeutic, Kevin, around all those beautiful flowers.
I can relate to that, and I can relate to the 100-degree temperatures these days. So, Maritza, thank you so much for the work you're doing, and for your organization's persistence with such a tough issue. And I'm just uplifted when I went to your website and saw that calendar where it is just clear that you all are chipping away and making progress every single month. That's really exciting and great to see. So thank you for being here and speaking with us. And thank you for believing in good.
Well, thank you. And thank you again for having me and for the encouragement. I really appreciate it. It's something that everyone needs every day. So thank you.
The Science of Good interviews support the work of For Goodness Sakes, a communications firm that uses behavioral change principles to help nonprofits and government agencies advance social causes. Learn more at fgsakes.com.